Ever feel like classrooms have their own kind of energy, you know? Papers everywhere, kids whispering about the latest video game instead of tectonic plates.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's a lot, even for the most organized teacher.
Right.
So what happens when you add AI to the mix? Get ready to deep dive into the world of one teacher who's using data and AI to kind of like decode the learning game.
Now, this isn't about replacing teachers with robots, which we hear a lot about, right?
Right.
This is more about giving educators like Mr. G, our sixth grade STEM teacher in the Pacific Northwest, a new lens to understand their students.
Right. And you can tell just from his blog that Mr. G is not afraid to try new things. He even calls himself a, quote, lifelong learner,
Love that.
which I love.
And that curiosity shines through in how he approaches tech in the classroom. He's presenting at conferences, blogging about his experiences. This isn't someone who just clicks, like, play on the smartboard and calls it a day.
Okay, so we know he's tech savvy, but did you know he's also big into environmental science? Like, even won the EPA's Presidential Innovation Award back in 2022.
Which makes total sense when you think about how comfortable he is with data. It's all connected. Analyzing environmental trends, looking for patterns in student learning. It's all about finding the story the data tells.
Totally. And that brings us to the experiment that caught our eye. He calls them student profile cards, and they're generated using AI.
Whoa.
I mean, how cool is that?
Very cool.
But he starts by being super honest in his blog.
Yeah.
He was chosen for this program by his district, working with an organization called Unconstrained.
Love the name.
Right.
Probably all about shaking up traditional education, huh?
Sounds like it. And get this, Mr. G admits he hadn't worked much with actual student data analysis before. He saw this as a learning opportunity, which I think says a lot about him as an educator.
Definitely. He's walking the walk, showing his students that it's okay to embrace new things and be open about what you don't know.
Okay, so walk us through the data itself. What's he feeding into this AI system? Is it like every click and quiz score?
Nothing quite that Big Brother-ish.
Okay, good.
He actually keeps it pretty low-key, starting with the beginning of the year, like getting to know your survey, basic stuff, interests, how they like to learn, that kind of thing.
Makes sense. Get a baseline for each student. Did he say how many kids actually filled it out?
He did. 73% completion rate across both his classes.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive engagement, which tells us he's probably doing something right to build that rapport with students.
Got to create that trust factor before you start analyzing their data, right?
Exactly. And think about it. Even with a simple survey, that's a goldmine of information for a teacher who's willing to dig in. Are there patterns in how students who prefer hands-on learning answered certain questions? Do kids who love reading gravitate towards the same hobbies? So much you can uncover.
Okay, so we've got the getting to know your data. What else?
His second data set comes from their environmental science project, their NOAA Ocean Guardian School, which is incredibly cool. And he uses a pre-evaluation survey to gauge their existing knowledge and attitudes.
So not just what they know, but how they feel about environmental topics. That's interesting.
And again, he had a 73% completion rate on that one, tied to a hands-on project.
Wow.
You've got to love that kind of student buy-in. It shows that even simple surveys can offer valuable data if you can get students invested in the process.
It's like you said, it's about the story the data tells. But how do you go from these surveys to, like, AI-generated insights? That's where it gets a little over my head.
That's where the custom ChatGPT comes in.
Yep.
Think of it like this. ChatGPT on its own is a bit like a super smart but very enthusiastic intern.
Okay.
It can write you a poem or summarize a factual topic, but it doesn't know the specifics of your classroom.
Okay, so you need to train it, like give it a crash course in sixth grade learning styles.
Exactly. Mr. G used a custom ChatGPT that was pre-trained on tons of educational data. Imagine feeding it thousands of lesson plans, student assessments, learning styles. It starts to see patterns that humans might miss.
So it's like giving ChatGPT a whole bunch of educational experience to draw on. That makes sense.
And what's really cool is that this kind of AI tailoring is becoming more and more accessible to teachers. Think user-friendly apps, not needing to code everything from scratch.
Right.
It's empowering teachers to be data detectives in their own classrooms.
Okay, so no more confusing spreadsheets, because that's like my nightmare fuel.
No spreadsheets required. Mr. G uploaded his depersonalized data, and don't worry, he removed any identifying information before giving it to the AI, so it's all anonymous.
Good, good.
And then here's the key. He gave the AI specific prompts, like, what are some common themes in how my students approach learning?
So it's not just dumping data and hoping for the best. There's an art to asking the AI the right questions.
Exactly. You've got to be specific and know what you're looking for. And with a little prompting from Mr. G, this custom chat GPT was able to analyze those surveys and generate some pretty fascinating insights.
Okay, so the AI has crunched the numbers, looked for patterns. What comes out the other end? What did Mr. G actually do with this analysis?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. And I have to say, pretty innovative. The AI helped him identify 5 distinct student profiles within his classes.
5 profiles. Okay, I'm already picturing those classic stereotypes. The overachiever, the class clown.
Not quite. And that's what's so refreshing about Mr. G's approach. He emphasizes that these aren't about labeling kids or putting them in boxes. Instead, think of them like learner tendencies. Some students might be very project-focused, while others thrive on individual research. Some might love visual aids, while others connect best through storytelling.
It's about recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to learning.
Exactly. And this kind of profiling, when done thoughtfully, can be incredibly valuable in all sorts of fields. Think about marketing. They use it to understand consumer behavior and target their messages effectively.
But using it in the classroom? That comes with a whole other level of responsibility, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about shaping young minds, not just selling products.
Absolutely. Mr. G is very aware of the ethical considerations here. He's not suggesting we use these profiles to limit students or pigeonhole them into certain learning styles.
So more like a starting point for understanding how to best support each student.
Exactly. And I love how he didn't just leave these profiles trapped in a spreadsheet somewhere. He turned them into something tangible and engaging. Visual cards.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm a sucker for anything that makes data more visual. Tell me more about these cards.
He actually used a combination of AI tools to create them. First, he gave ChatGPT the 4.0 model, for all you AI nerds out there, the descriptions of each profile, and basically said, make these visually appealing.
Talk about putting the AI to the test. Did it work? Was it like instant graphic design magic?
Well, not quite. This is where we see the limits of AI, at least for now. ChatGPT can generate text like a champ, but it struggles with more complex visual layouts.
It's like that saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Maybe AI just hasn't cracked the code on pictures yet.
Exactly. So ChatGPT laid some groundwork, but Mr. G ended up using another AI tool, Midjourney, to generate images and icons that fit each profile.
Okay, so a bit of a tag team approach with the AI. I like it.
And even then, he wasn't afraid to add his own human touch. He used a program called Paint.net to fine-tune the designs and make sure they truly represented his vision.
It's that perfect blend of human creativity and AI capability. So cool. But the big question is, how did the students react to these cards?
Well, he brought them into the classroom as a reflection activity, asking students to choose which profile resonated most with them. And you know what? Some of them surprised him with their choices.
Oh, I love that. It means they were really thinking about their own learning styles, maybe even challenging their own assumptions about themselves. What kind of aha moments did Mr. G have?
He mentioned that some students identified with multiple profiles, which I think speaks to the fact that we're not just one type of learner. We can be adaptable and draw on different strengths depending on the situation.
It's like we contain multitudes.
Yeah.
Even as 6th graders. But that does raise an interesting question. Does this idea of student profiles challenge the whole notion of fixed learning styles? Like, maybe we're not visual learners or auditory learners, but rather a blend of different approaches.
That's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen. But you're right, it makes you wonder if these traditional labels are too limiting. And who better to explore that than a teacher who's willing to experiment and see what his students can teach him?
Speaking of which, Mr. G didn't just stop at the cards, did he? He found a way to weave these profiles into a bigger project. And I have to say, this is classic Mr. G.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. The Starship Crew manifests.
Yes. Of course, it wouldn't be a Mr. G lesson without a little sci-fi flair. So we've got these AI-generated student profiles transformed into awesome visual cards, and now they're, like, becoming part of Starship Crew manifests. This is where I really want to nerd out on the details.
Right. It's such a clever way to take something that could feel very clinical, data analysis, student profiles, and make it fun and engaging for these kids.
Exactly. So how does it actually work? Are the kids, like, designing their own starships?
That's the beauty of it. It's all connected to a larger ongoing project in his classroom. They've been building up to this all year, and the profile cards add a whole new layer of depth and personalization to the process.
Okay, so instead of just saying, my starship needs a captain, a navigator, and an engineer,
Right.
They're thinking about the specific strengths and learning styles represented on those cards.
Exactly. Mr. G gave an example in his blog post, a student who identified really strongly with the collaborator profile,
Right.
realized that their skills would be most valuable in a communication or diplomacy role on the Starship.
So it's not just about assigning roles. It's about encouraging students to think critically about where they can best contribute, using their own unique strengths. I love that.
And it shows how data can be a springboard for creativity, not a constraint. It's not about putting kids into boxes. It's about giving them the tools to understand themselves better and then find their place, even if it's on a fictional starship.
And speaking of thinking outside the box, Mr. G ends his blog post with a question that's been bouncing around in my head ever since I read it. He asks, and this is a quote, "What else are people doing with data and AI?"
Ooh.
It's like he's sending out a call to action for educators everywhere.
And it's the perfect question to leave us with, because this is just one example of how AI is starting to kind of reshape education. There are so many possibilities.
It's exciting,
Huh.
but it's also a little daunting, like how do we make sure these tools are being used ethically and equitably for all learners?
It's a conversation we need to be having as a society. How do we balance the incredible potential of AI with the responsibility we have to ensure that every student benefits?
That's it. That's the core of it.
Yeah.
Mr. G's experiment doesn't give us all the answers, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. It's about using data to empower, not just to analyze.
Yeah,
And that's a future of education I can get behind.
absolutely. And who knows, maybe there's a sixth grader out there designing their Starship Crew manifest right now,
Right.
who's already thinking about how to build that future.
No, that's a deep dive I can't wait to take. And that's it for this deep dive. We'll catch you all next time.